Today, our theme is the banquet, and so we're going to talk about the abundance of discipleship, both what God gives to us and what we can give to God and to God's children. So when I was 26, I moved in with my dad in order to pay off some student debt and get it back into school. I had just come from studying at a school in Rhode Island, and I did not have a job. Dad lived in Junction City, a pretty small town about an hour outside of Eugene, and I did not have a car. So I needed to find a job in Junction City. I sent out applications expecting part-time work. One day, I was in the Goodwill, and I ran into a friend from high school there. As it turned out, her sister-in-law worked at the Goodwill, and they were looking for a full-time cashier. Well, it was not the job of my dreams. It would enable me to pay off debt and get back to school. The fact that I found a full-time job in this tiny town and just happened to be in that store when my friend was in the store was pretty amazing. It felt very much like God was taking care of me at that time. It was a good experience, and I met some really interesting people. I paid off my debt and finished my schooling at the University of Oregon. So have you had a similar experience where it felt very much like God was taking care of you? In the Old Testament reading today, Isaiah talks about a servant of God. Chapter 54 through 9a is the third in these servant songs, which begins in Isaiah chapter 42 and ends in chapter 52. Christians have long associated this servant with Jesus, or suffering servant is what we have called it in Isaiah. What we see in the reading today is God taking care of this servant, this disciple of God. God gives him the tools he needs to do God's work and helps him when he faces fierce opposition to the work he is called to do. God is his advocate and defender. This servant in Isaiah is God's disciple doing God's work in the world. So what is a disciple of God exactly? Jesus says in the gospel today that a disciple is one who denies themselves and follows him. When we hear that, we may think of Mother Teresa or Martin Luther King Jr. A disciple certainly can be that, yet not all of us are called to the big callings in life. A job as a cashier at Goodwill is not an instance of being called to a large community action, such as Mother Teresa or Martin Luther King Jr. were engaged in. Yet out of it came building new relationships and opportunities to do God's work. I remember one day someone had donated a bag of clothes. The donator had accidentally left a large amount of money in the clothes. I happened to be the one sorting donations that day and came across several bills that I assumed she did not mean to donate to us. Thankfully, she had dropped it off, and I had began sorting immediately, so I knew who it belonged to. I made sure that her money was returned to her. It was a little thing in the grand scheme of things, but for that one person, it made a big difference in her life. So discipleship is in the everyday, in our jobs, in our families, in our communities. Taking care of God's creatures, taking care of our children, doing things for our neighbors. One day I was having some car issues and I needed to get the car to the shop. I was alone near my car, and my neighbor, who was outside, spotted me struggling to figure out what to do with it. He came over and helped out so that I could get it to a mechanic. These little things are what discipleship is about for the majority of us. The big things are absolutely memorable. And yet even the Mother Teresas and the Martin Luther King Jr.'s of the world engaged in everyday discipleship. Everyday discipleship is what makes a huge difference for our neighbors daily. Don't take the little things for granted, because everything you do to take care of God's world is important. And God does not leave us alone to do this work. She is with us through it all. Just as God gave the servant in Isaiah the tools to do what he needed to do and the strength and the purpose to engage in them, God will give that to us as well. It also means that some of our work as disciples will be met with backlash. It may seem strange when Isaiah says that the servant will not be put to shame in response to the violent behavior he faces. Shame is not my first thought when I read those lines. It's more of safety. Yet the world of the Bible is an honor-shame society, so it would seem that honor is the first concern for the writer here. Being struck, having one's beard pulled out, being spat upon is shameful. Yet the author says, "The Lord helps me. Therefore, I have not been disgraced. Therefore, I have set my face like flint, and I know that I shall not be put to shame." God ensures the servant's honor regardless of who attempts to shame him. There are times when we get pushback for doing God's work. There's a congregation, St. Timothy Episcopal Congregation in Brookings, Oregon, that has a ministry to homeless folks in the community. I've talked about it before because one of our own ELCA deaconesses, Sister Cora Rose, provides legal services to the homeless people who may need an attorney. Some of the neighbors of St. Timothy were upset by the homeless outreach at the church and sent a complaint to the city of Brookings to put a stop to the outreach. The city started putting restrictions on what St. Timothy's could do for the people they were serving, which resulted in the church taking the city to court. Sister Cora kept the deaconess community up to date on how things were going at St. Timothy's, and in the end, the church won. In addition to allowing the church to keep its ministry going, the city of Brookings is required to pay $400,000 as a settlement, which will pay for the attorney fees that the church acquired due to the case. Yet it was not an easy struggle between the church and the city, which started in 2021. While no one probably had their beard pulled out, which I assume did not happen, or was attacked physically, this was definitely a backlash to God's work in the community. Now, admittedly, this is a complicated issue. The neighbors wanting a safe and secure community is a valid concern. Yet St. Timothy's is clearly doing God's work. Perhaps the neighbors may have felt better if they had engaged volunteering for the outreach that St. Timothy had, getting to know the people the church was serving. How much of the neighbors' fears were built on ignorance and assumptions about who the people were who came to the church for help? Fear or frustration so often puts us in the way of allowing God's work to happen. We're human, that's what happens. Yet when we turn to God for help, she will provide. Our fears, insecurities, or frustrations do not have to have the final say. As we see in Isaiah, God gives us the tools we need to do her work, and then she provides us the strength and the confidence to engage in that work. The servant in Isaiah is so confident in what God can do and how God can help him. Verse 10, which is not in our gospel reading today, says, "Who among you fears the Lord and obeys the voice of his servant, who walks in darkness and has no light, yet trusts in the name of the Lord and relies upon his God?" Let me read that again. "Who among you fears the Lord and obeys the voice of his servant, who walks in darkness and has no light, yet trusts in the name of the Lord and relies upon his God?" God will take care of us and can be trusted. We can turn to her when we are struggling to do her work in the world. Sometimes we will do that work and it will be about building community with God's children, as in the case of my neighbor helping me with my car, or my opportunity to ensure that a woman's money was returned to her. Sometimes there will be backlash when doing God's work, in the case of St. Timothy's in Brookings. But whatever the case, God will give us what we need to do her work and will stand behind us if we face hardship in doing that work. Remember every day that you are a disciple of God and she will take care of you in that work. And discipleship can occur everywhere, from workplaces like Goodwill and in our everyday lives with our neighbors, our children, our pets, our community. You can turn to God in all things, both the difficult things and the joyous things. As Isaiah made clear, God will not forsake us, and she will stand with us whenever we are doing her work.